Hi, welcome back to Math with Kim. We are now going to be talking about fractions, decimals, and order of operations. So a lot of what we need to do with our basic skills in math is to change fractions into decimals, okay? This is very easily accomplished on a calculator, obviously, but also we run across mixed numbers that need to be written as decimals as well. So I know a lot of people end up, they can do this step, but then they're like, what do I do when there's a whole number? Remember, a whole number is a whole number, so it stays out in front of the decimal. So we're not going to do anything with that. We just bring it down and we treat it as if it's a problem that is just a fraction to a decimal, okay? And then lastly, we're going to do a little review of rounding again. I know my last section that I put a video up for was rounding decimals, but this will just be a reminder. All right, so what do we need to do to change a fraction into a decimal? Well, we need to divide, because that's what fractions are, is a division. We're dividing something up, okay? So often what I like to look at it as is you take this fraction and you tip it on its side. So the 1 drops down inside and the 4 is on the outside, okay? Now we have different definitions that go along with it, dividend, divisor. So I'm not going to go through that. So I'm really worried about the process and what you're doing. So make sure you're always tipping these fractions over. Notice with the 3/16, same thing, right? The 3 tips down and it goes under, and the 16 is what is being divided in. All right. Now, this is something that's slightly new when it comes to division because there's one extra step. Notice 4 cannot divide into a 1 evenly, or at all, so we put our 0 there. Now, 1 is a whole number, so when we think of a whole number, you should always realize that a whole number has a decimal at the end, even though we don't see it. So you put that decimal in, and then you can put in as many zeros again as you like at the after the decimal, okay? So now we start dividing. We know that 4 does not divide into 1, but does 4 divide into 10? Yes, 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. Then that's what the other 0 is for. Bring it down. And again, if you needed more zeros, you would just tack them on to the end, all right? Now we start over. 4 divides into 20. How many times? 5. 5 times 4 is 20. Drop it here. Subtract. 0, of course, is our remainder, so we can stop. So in other words, 1/4 written as a decimal is 0.25. A quarter. All right, now let's quickly look at this mixed number. And as you notice, as I told you, the whole number just comes down. So all we're going to worry about is this 3/16. So again, tip it on its side, 3 goes in. 16 divides into 3 0 times. And notice I put in my decimal after my whole number 3, and I put in some zeros. Now, I just kind of kept going with my zeros to see how many I would need. So let's start our division. 6 doesn't divide into 3, but 6 can divide into 30, right? How many times? 1. So 1 times 16 is 16. 30 minus 16 is 14. Bring down the next 0. 16 divides into 140 8 times. 8 times 16 is 128. Subtract. We get remainder of 12. So it's not a 0 yet. So we still have a remainder. So bring down your next 0. So how many times does 16 divide into 120? 7 times. 7 times 16 is 112. Subtract and we get 8. 8 is still a remainder, so bring down another 0. Divide 16 into 80. It goes in 5 times. 5 times 16 is indeed 80. And look what happens when we subtract. Finally, no remainder. We're done. So 3/16 equals 0.1875. Or in other words, 1,875 10 thousandths, and we would just plug that decimal next to our whole number. So now we've written a mixed number as a decimal. Now let's round that to 0.1875. Now if we round it to the tenths, notice I underlined the tenths in yellow, and there's an 8 that comes after it, so 8 will definitely round up my tenths place to 2.2. Okay, now what if we were asked to round to the hundredths place? Go back to your original problem, find the hundredths, tenths, hundredths. I underlined it in pink, and I'll be looking at the number that comes after it, 7. 7 is big enough to round up our 8, so if we're rounding to the hundredths place, it's 2.19. Now how about the thousandths place? All right, so if we go here and we're rounding to the thousandths, oops, sorry, it's right here, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So my 7 is in the thousandths place, and I look at what comes after it is a 5. Is that 5 or more? Yes. So that's going to round my 7 up. So now I'm going to have 2.188. See that? That 7 rounds to an 8, and then everything after it drops off.